The air in the back of the church felt heavy, like it was made of water. I could hear the organ music humming through the floorboards, vibrating in my shoes. Everything was white, bright, and perfect, but all I could see was the small, jagged tear in the fabric of the moment. I stood 3 feet away from my brother, Leo, as he adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at me and smiled, a pure, terrifyingly honest smile. My hand was in my pocket, gripping a phone that felt like a hot coal against my palm. I knew if I spoke, the music would stop, the flowers would wither, and the life he had built would turn to ash. I watched his chest rise and fall with a nervous breath. I had the power to save him, or the power to let him drown. I chose to stay silent, and that silence has been screaming in my ears every night since. Leo had always been the steady one, the kind of man who kept his promises before he even made them. We grew up in a house where silence was a weapon, so we learned to value the truth above everything else. When he met Sarah, it felt like the world finally made sense for him. She was soft-spoken, with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze. They spent their Sunday mornings in the kitchen, the smell of burnt toast and expensive coffee filling the air. I used to sit at their table and watch them, feeling a dull ache of jealousy for the peace they had found. He told me once, while we were fixing his old truck in the driveway, that he didn't know who he was before her. He looked at me with grease on his forehead and said, "She's the only person who actually sees me." I believed him, because I wanted to believe that someone like Leo could actually be happy. The stakes were more than just a wedding. It was his entire sense of reality. He had invested his savings, his heart, and his future into a woman he thought was his mirror image. I was the older brother, the protector, the one who was supposed to catch the things he missed. But I was blinded by how much I wanted him to be okay. It started with a vibration on a coffee table 3 months before the wedding. Sarah was in the bathroom, and Leo was out grabbing more firewood. Her phone lit up with a notification, a name I didn't recognize, and a message that didn't make sense. It just said, "Last night was a mistake. We can't keep doing this." My heart didn't drop, it just stopped beating for a second. I told myself it was a wrong number, or a friend going through a drama that Sarah was helping with. A week later, I saw her car parked behind a warehouse on the edge of town at 10 o'clock at night. I pulled over, my headlights cutting through the dark, and watched a man I'd never seen before lean into her window. They weren't talking. When she came over for dinner the next night, she brought a bottle of wine and talked about the flower arrangements. I watched her hands as she poured the drinks, looking for a tremor or a sign of guilt. There was nothing but grace. I asked her, while Leo was in the garage, if everything was okay with the wedding planning. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's going to be the most honest day of my life." The way she said the word honest felt like a slap in the face. I should have said something then, right there in the kitchen with the hum of the refrigerator filling the gaps between us. But I looked at Leo through the window, laughing at something on the radio, and I froze. I convinced myself that if I pulled one thread, the whole tapestry would vanish, and he would have nothing left. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were a blur of escalating whispers and missed calls. I started following her, not because I wanted to be a detective, but because I was looking for a reason to be wrong. I wanted to find out the man was her brother, or a long-lost cousin, or anyone other than who he clearly was. One Tuesday, I followed her to a small apartment complex 3 towns over. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching the shadows move behind a 3rd-floor curtain. When she finally walked out, she was fixing her hair, looking around the parking lot with a practiced, predatory caution. The conflict in my chest was a physical weight, making it hard to draw a full breath. Every time I saw Leo, I felt like a traitor, like I was the one holding the knife behind his back. I'd start to speak, my mouth opening to let the truth out, and then he'd mention how happy he was. "You're my best man for a reason," he told me over a beer one night. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have someone I could trust with my life. I swallowed a mouthful of liquid that tasted like copper and nodded. The near catches were constant. A stray receipt in her coat, a late-night text that he almost saw. I found myself covering for her, jumping into conversations to distract him when her stories didn't line up. I wasn't protecting her anymore. I was protecting the version of the world Leo lived in. I was terrified of the explosion, of the look on his face when his soul finally broke. I thought I was being kind by letting him live in the lie for just a little longer. But the secrets were stacking up like cordwood, waiting for a single spark to turn into an inferno. The night of the rehearsal dinner, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. I found Sarah alone in the hallway of the restaurant, her back to the door, staring at a photo on her phone. I didn't sneak up. I just walked until I was standing right behind her. I saw the screen before she could lock it. It was a photo of her and the man from the warehouse, their faces pressed together in a way that left no room for interpretation. She turned around, her face pale in the dim hallway light, and for the first time, the mask slipped. "I know," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. She didn't cry, she didn't beg, and she didn't try to deny it. She just looked at me with a cold, hard clarity that made my skin crawl. "Are you going to tell him?" she asked, her voice a sharp, clinical whisper. I looked at the door to the dining room where our entire family was laughing and clinking glasses. I thought about the house they'd just bought and the life Leo had spent 10 years building toward this moment. "If you tell him, you kill him," she said, stepping closer until I could smell the wine on her breath. "If you stay quiet, he gets to be happy for the rest of his life, and I'll never see that man again. I promise." I looked at her and saw the lie for what it was, a poison that she was offering as medicine. I had 10 seconds to change the course of history, to grab Leo and pull him out of the burning building. I opened my mouth, but the words stayed trapped in my throat, choked off by a cowardice I didn't know I possessed. I walked away from her without saying a word, leaving the truth sitting in that hallway like a ticking bomb. I let her walk back into that room and kiss my brother, knowing exactly where those lips had been 2 hours before. The wedding day was a masterpiece of deception. I stood at the altar, the wood of the pews smelling like lemon polish and old hymnals. When the priest asked if anyone had a reason why these two should not be wed, the silence in the church was deafening. I felt the eyes of our mother on me, the pride in her face as she watched her youngest son marry his dream girl. I felt the sweat trickling down my spine, a cold needle of guilt stitching me into the lie. I watched Leo slide the ring onto her finger, his hand steady, his eyes bright with a hope that made me sick. The reception was a whirlwind of fake smiles and hollow toasts. I stood on the stage, the microphone shaking in my hand as I told the crowd how perfect they were for each other. Every word felt like a stone I was forced to swallow, heavy and cold. 6 months later, the floor fell out. It wasn't a slow realization. It was a sudden, violent collision with reality. Leo found a burner phone hidden in the spare tire well of her car, filled with a year's worth of evidence. The fallout was a slow-motion car crash that leveled our entire family. He didn't just lose his wife, he lost his sense of gravity, his ability to believe that anything was real. He moved into my guest room, a shell of the man he used to be, sitting in the dark for hours. The worst part wasn't the divorce, or the lawyers, or the screaming matches in the driveway. It was the afternoon he sat on my sofa and asked me when I first suspected something was wrong. I couldn't look him in the eye, and that was all the answer he needed. "You knew," he whispered, the realization breaking what was left of his heart. "You stood next to me at the altar, and you knew she was a lie." He didn't yell. He just got up and walked out of my house, leaving a silence that hasn't been broken in 3 years. I still drive past the church sometimes, usually late at night when the streets are empty and the moon is high. I sit in my car and look at the steps where we took the photos, where we all looked so happy and so whole. I realize now that I didn't save him from the pain. I just made sure he was alone when it finally hit him. I thought I was protecting his heart by keeping the secret, but all I did was build a cage for him. I let him walk into a trap because I was too afraid to be the one who pulled the trigger on his happiness. Now, I live in the wreckage of a peace that was never real to begin with. Leo doesn't call me on my birthday anymore, and he doesn't come home for Christmas. He's moved to another state, trying to rebuild a life out of the scraps of the one I helped destroy. I'm still the protector, standing guard over a grave of a relationship that died the moment I chose to say nothing. I used to think that the truth was the hardest thing to carry. I was wrong. The hardest thing to carry is the weight of the words you never had the courage to say. I didn't stop the wedding because I loved my brother too much to see him cry. But looking back at his empty chair today, I realized that I didn't stay silent to save him. I stayed silent to save myself from the sound of his heart breaking.